Welcome to the Pink Tax Podcast, a no-nonsense podcast for millennial women, building wealth and smashing the patriarchy, $1 at a time, with your hosts, Janine and Tara.
Hi, Janine.
Hey, Tara. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to introduce our guest for this evening. Leah Gazan is an MP with the NDP party and is joining us on the Pink Tax Podcast for this episode. So thank you so much for joining us, Leah.
Oh, I'm just so happy to be here today.
Now, do you want to start by maybe sharing a little bit about yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently the member of Parliament for Winnipeg Centre. I was elected in October in the last election. I've been a long time kind of community leader, human rights and anti-poverty advocate. And, when I was elected and prior to being elected, even prior to COVID, one of the things that I ran on was that I would support a guaranteed livable basic income. And so that's what brings us here today to talk about my Motion 46. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity to do that with you.
Fantastic. So just for anyone who hasn't heard of Motion 46, do you want to quickly run through it at a high level?
Well, just at a high level, I mean, we know right now during the pandemic, there's more and more people all the time that are losing their jobs. Businesses are closing down. And one of the things we've learned through the CERB is that we actually do have the resources. What we've lacked for so long is political will. I represent the third poorest riding in the country. We have, in 2018, they reported that 41.1% of children living in the riding I'm currently representing live in poverty. That's abhorrent. That's abhorrent because this current government and certainly consecutive conservative and liberal governments have spent billions of dollars on what I call corporate welfare, whether it be pipelines, whether it be not going after offshore tax havens, giving $50 million to MasterCard, $12 million to Loblaws. Meanwhile, in my community, as the pandemic persists, we have families spilling on the streets. I have families that are currently living in shelter with children. I have families that have lost jobs as a result of the pandemic who are currently living in hotel rooms with many children. We need to do better, and we need to take the money that is invested in corporate welfare in this country and reinvest in people. And that's exactly what my motion intends to do. My motion that I put forward, Motion 46, is in support of a guaranteed livable basic income, accounting for regional differences in living costs. It would be for all Canadians over 18, single persons, families, seniors, students, persons with disabilities, temporary foreign workers, permanent residents, and refugee claimants. And it would be in addition to current and future public services and income supports paid on a regular basis. And it doesn't require necessarily that you have had participation in the labor market, education and training in order to be eligible. And really what this motion is designed to do is to uphold the Canadian Charter. And one of the things that our Charter states that that we are supposed to do is uphold human rights and dignity, and that's exactly why I decided to put this private member's motion forward.
That's so awesome. I've watched some of your interviews that you've had on this so far, and one of the things that really struck me that you said was throughout the pandemic, there's been a failure of government. And that really struck me. And I was wondering, like, with everything that you've just mentioned of who this would help and what it would add to the current programs that we already have, I was wondering what other government failures drew you to a basic income as the measure to prevent these failures from occurring in maybe a future pandemic or another shock, whatever it might be.
Yeah, 100%. So, as I stated before, this is something that I campaigned on during the election. This is something that I believe in. I base my opinion on research. I know that like I said, there's a lot of stereotypes or a misunderstanding that when you actually look after people, it results in people not being motivated to work. And actually, what we've seen through research is that through the Mincome study in Manitoba and Finland, that in fact people continue to work, but you have a reduction in costs and other social supports. For example, health, physical health, and mental health improves. We know the high cost of poverty. We need to start talking about the high costs of poverty. So in what we find is actually in the long term, it actually saves money. There are so many groups during CERB, during the pandemic. The first group that was supported when we found out we were going in a global pandemic was the fossil fuel industry. Meanwhile, in ridings like mine, I'm begging for money to ensure that people have a safe place to live, a safe place to stay, particularly during the pandemic. In response to Canada Health Canada guidelines, which say that the best deterrent in this pandemic is physical distance and frequent hand washing. And I say to that, you need a home and access to clean drinking water for that. I have a very large population who resides in the homeless community right in my own backyard. They deserve to be safe. They deserve to have their human rights and dignity. Seniors across the country, we've seen in some of the care homes, again, human rights and dignity. Students who are finding themselves in a situation where they don't even have the finances to go to school. If we can spend billions and billions and billions of dollars bailing out big corporations, through this corporate welfare system that's become so normalized people don't question it, then certainly we can afford to invest in human rights and dignity.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. And Janine and I are both from Alberta, and I hope that some folks are starting to see that through this pandemic, you might love oil and gas, but sometimes it just doesn't love you back. And a lot of these measures, require you to be employed. And if you can't go to work because, like you've said, it's staying 6 feet apart and washing your hands, and if your job evaporated because of that, why should children suffer? We don't have children going to work. So I really hope that that the point that you just made is now evident.
And just to build on that, I really don't think people love oil and gas. I think they love feeding their families. I think they love having a home. I think they love to live with human rights and dignity. And we see, so this isn't about people that are working. This is not about the workers that currently are working in oil and gas. This is about the fact that the kind of subsidies that go into bailing out these big oil corporations that can certainly pay for themselves, we need to use that money to invest in people, whether it's transitioning into a green economy, whether it's ensuring if they, as the pandemic persists, find themselves out of work, that they can still do what they love. Paying for having a home, supporting their families, looking after their kids. And at this critical juncture where we see growing rates of unemployment, we need to act now to ensure that all people in Canada are afforded dignity and human rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So with the motion that you've put forward, I've noticed, and I think the listeners know where I end up on the political spectrum, I've noticed that sometimes these points are made, sometimes motions are brought forward, and then what comes through as, like, say, for instance, the CERB or some form of legislation, it doesn't actually protect the most vulnerable people. So I was wondering, what can we do as citizens to ensure that a motion like the one that you've brought forward will actually insulate the vulnerable populations from shocks like COVID, without instead, benefiting those that are already privileged. For instance, the giant corporations, or maybe even just the upper class Canadians.
Yeah, so I think with this motion, one of the critical pieces is paragraph 5. And what that means is that this motion isn't in replacement of our current social safety net. It's in addition to, because there are necessary supports for diverse populations that reside in this place people call Canada, and that includes, for example, disabled persons. Their costs related to things like medications very often, even things that for people with like requiring wheelchairs, these things come with great costs. It has to be in addition to the current and future government public services and income supports. So I think that's one point about certainly my motion. Certainly critiques that have come out about a guaranteed livable basic income is that it cannot replace the current social safety net. And I want to say that I absolutely agree. It has to be in addition to. There are things that you can do right now to act in support of it. One, you can sign the petition at leahgazan.ca/basic income motion. That's leahgazan.ca/basic income motion. Add your name. We're also organizing a national day of action. And I just want to remind people that, when Tommy Douglas came out fighting for Medicare, people thought he was crazy. Oh, it can't be done. It'll bankrupt the country. But actually, now it's become a normalized part of Canada. It's one of the things that our country is the most revered for, is having Medicare in Canada. And the same thing's happening now. Thousands and thousands of Canadians across the country, now that they've received the CERB, see that this is an absolute possibility. We have lots of research that's been done. One only has to look at what's happening in Finland now, or Manitoba, way back in the day, decades ago, with the MinCom study, that this is very much a possibility. Now it's just requiring political will, and people need to remember they choose who are in government and who is not, and we need to make this a key issue so that any party knows that this will determine whether they get elected or not. This is a human rights and dignity matter, and we need to keep pushing it forward.
100%. I was gonna ask the question around kind of some of the naysayers, and I know you've addressed it a little bit, but I'm more curious to hear what you're hearing around some of the negative comments, because what I hear is, people won't continue looking for a job. And what I see, and I think Alberta actually has the highest number of CERB instances per capita, or it's 1 in 4 Albertans are on CERB, is that the people that aren't working, actually, they do really want to work. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that, but also if you've seen any research around innovation and leveraging a universal basic income, allowing people to, create small businesses because they don't have to worry about, again, putting food on the table.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, research proves that in fact that is false. That even during CERB, when people are provided with a basic income, absolutely they have found it false, that people continue to want to work. And I think, like you've indicated, now people have the ability to do things like, pursue their entrepreneurial dreams. But we also don't talk, artists are able to create art. And I think, with artists, people often, I see a devaluing of the arts, but can you imagine COVID and being isolated without books, poetry, music, movies?
Netflix.
Netflix, like how terrible would this pandemic be? And they provide a critical support for joy and to support mental health. Many parents who want to stay home and care for their children, another form of unpaid work that often goes devalued, would now give people the choice to do that. But we also have to remember there's many people in society, for example, seniors. Do we want 80-year-olds going to work? There's so many seniors across our country that live in destitute poverty. Disabled persons who very often want to work, but because of discrimination and stereotypes and stigma, have more difficulty gaining employment, and often are part of form some of the most economically disadvantaged in our society, individuals that are suffering from mental health and trauma issues, that really do need supports, people with intellectual disabilities. So we need to start, when we talk about things like picking ourselves up from our bootstraps and, getting to work, not everybody is born with the same deck of cards, and certainly we're not born in a society where everybody is valued equally, and we need to address those disparities with something like a guaranteed livable basic income.
One of the things I hate the most is that notion that you need to pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, because first of all, if you've actually ever looked at where that saying came from, it was like decades ago, but it was supposed to be satire. And what drives me wild is, people, and I think that this is a point that everyone kind of needs to remember, is you can say pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, but that becomes impossible for people if they don't have any boots. And that's what we're seeing, I think, in our society, is that separation of the middle class, and we're seeing people in poverty, and those are the people that just, they don't have boots. So how can they pull themselves up by the bootstraps?
Yeah, and I think we need to look at, the fact that right now we live in a country that gives billions and billions and billions of dollars. They invest in billions of dollars in corporate welfare. They refuse to do what's needed to do to get the taxes owed that are being housed in offshore tax havens. We are giving taxpayer dollars to credit card companies and Loblaws. So, it's not that people in this country are not benefiting from taxes. It's not that people in this country are not being let off the hook, but unfortunately, it's not just individuals on the ground. And I think we need to change that discussion, divest from corporate welfare, and start investing in people.
I love it. Yeah, I really love it. I was writing that quote down. One thing that I've been wondering about, and maybe it's just because I didn't take political science in school or anything like that, but what does it mean for this motion now that the government is prorogued?
Well, what might happen, certainly when I found out, I'm a new MP and I heard the government was prorogued, I thought, oh man, this is our light for a guaranteed livable basic income for all. The motion will stand. It's more of a technicality. The number might change. So instead of being motion 46, it could be something else. But the motion can stand. So I'm looking forward to, once we resume, to put forward this motion again. It certainly is getting lots of support, even though the Parliament has been prorogued. I have spoken to members opposite in all parties. I do have support in the Liberal Party, in the Green Party, in the Bloc even, for this particular motion. I'm working on support from a member of the Conservative Party. Human rights are not a partisan issue. Human rights should always be human rights. And so I'm looking forward to working with other members in the House of Commons to advance human rights and dignity for all.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Now, I have a question just for our listeners who maybe don't know the difference, because before we kind of started seeing what you were, posting on Twitter and Motion 46, Tara drew my attention to it. I don't know if I was 100% clear on what the difference is between UBI, so universal basic income, and the guaranteed livable basic income that you talked about.
Yeah, so what I'm proposing is to provide a basic income for people that don't have a livable income. For example, I'm a member of Parliament. I have a fairly good earnings right now. I don't need a subsidy. But there are many people in my riding, for example, that need a subsidy, or many people who are working, but because of COVID, for example, or before, or childcare needs, they aren't able to work enough hours to have a livable income. So this would be like a top up for individuals, and all individuals included in my motion, in addition to existing and future government services and supports.
And so how do you determine how much an individual gets? Like, does it change province by province or city by city?
100%. So one of the things, certainly in paragraph 1 of my motion, I talk about accounting for regional differences. For example, it's less expensive to live in Winnipeg, if I can use Manitoba as an example, than remote northern communities where sometimes it's $14 for a 4 liter of milk. And so we need to account for regional differences in terms of cost of living and the kind of income supports that are provided.
That's amazing.
Have you determined at all, like obviously it's going to be different for different jurisdictions, but have you determined like a base, or is that something that once it's in, that would need to be decided?
Yeah, so these are things that can be worked out. It's a motion. I'm hoping this motion pushes forward into legislation. Certainly we know through COVID that our current employment insurance system is outdated and archaic. It's not working. I'm hoping as this motion gets pushed forward, that those discussions are to be had. Again, critical to my motion is paragraph 5, and that's in addition to current and future government public services and income supports. We cannot have a guaranteed livable basic income and gut our social safety net. We need to build on a social safety net that already is inadequate to ensure that people can live with human rights and dignity.
Very cool. I love that. I love what you said about the differences in food prices, especially when we look at like the Northwestern communities. I just don't understand how this hasn't been addressed earlier. We have so much food throughout this country, and it just doesn't make sense to me that I can pay $3 for a head of cauliflower, and somebody who lives, not that many hundreds of kilometers north from me will pay, 10 times that. It's unbelievable.
100%. And I also think one of the notions we have to work through is, why did we learn that it's noble? Like, I was a single parent for a time, and I worked, sometimes 2-3 jobs to pay my mortgage, look after my son, make sure I had enough for daycare. Why is that normalized? Because it's not healthy. Again, needing to divest from this corporate welfare system that makes people that are just trying to work hard, raise their families, have to work even harder to benefit the ultra rich.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important there to note, and we did mention this in our last episode, like when we talk about the ultra rich, I think a lot of people think that if they make like $100,000, they fall into that category. But I think it's important to note that that's, those are people that are that have tens or hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars.
100%. And they need to pay their fair share instead of families that are struggling on the ground.
Definitely.
Yeah. I thought of another question. I hope you don't mind if I just pop this one in there. I was thinking about this. How do you get the GLBI into the hands of folks that right now don't file taxes, either because there's barriers that prevent them from doing so, or they don't know how, or they're unhoused, they don't have ID, so this is just not even on their radar.
Or they're unbanked.
Yeah, or they're unbanked. Like, I know there are some folks that can't get the social benefits that we already have because they just don't file taxes.
Well, and I think that goes back. I live and I represent, again, the third poorest riding in the country. There has been a real lack of investment in frontline organizations, including from consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments. And I say that because they're the only ones that have been in federal government in this country so far. And that's what it looks like. So, I mean, when we're talking about, again, going back to paragraph 5, it needs to be in addition to future government public services and income supports. We need more investment in frontline services to ensure that we can reach people so that they're not left behind. I know there are ways to do that. Like during the election, a lot of people are not aware of it, but as long as you have an address, even if you're living in the homeless community with one of the local shelters, you can vote. And a lot of people, first of all, are not made aware of those rights, but why can't we ensure that in those places, if we invest money, hopefully we won't need shelters going forward. Everybody will have accessible, affordable social housing. But for people, for example, that are struggling with serious mental health issues, why are we not investing in supports to ensure that supports are available to ensure that people don't lose out on accessing these very important programs? And that ultimately is about government choices. Governing is about choices. And I'm saying certainly very strongly with this motion, certainly around matters that I've advocated for most of my life, that we need to make real investments in people, in our environment, to ensure that all people are afforded with human rights and dignity.
Definitely. Now, I think kind of building on that, like the human rights and dignity side of things, we've seen just how detrimental, being in isolation or not having access to the social services that people need, it can be to people's mental health during this pandemic. How do you see UBI impacting mental health across Canada?
Well, this is what I've said, and certainly I've said to colleagues across the way. Having families have to wait and individuals have to wait for the announcement that happens every couple of weeks or in a month is so bad for mental health. People need stability and security right now, particularly during a time of pandemic. It's bad enough. It certainly puts a strain on individuals, even those who are not experiencing financial strain. But when you add that on to the kind of strain that people are just trying to figure out their way through the pandemic, it is a serious public health and safety issue. Keeping people safe, making sure people's mental health is looked after. We know that this could go on. We've heard from the World Health Organization, a year and a half up to 3 years. And we need to put these programs in place to ensure that people can live with human rights and dignity and in support of positive mental health.
Definitely. And I think you're right. Even myself, like knowing people that are leveraging CERB or are on EI or what have you, like it is super stressful waiting to see if what's going to happen come end of September, right? We're a month away from CERB running out.
100%. And I have to say, I find that really frustrating when I'm begging for support for my wonderful community that I'm privileged to live in and represent, Winnipeg Center, and then I see millions and billions of dollars flying out the door for big corporations. So I think, we are in a critical juncture. I do think it's hopeful that we can get this through. Again, sign the petition at leahgazan.ca/basic income motion. so that we can realize human rights and dignity for all Canadians, seniors, students, disabled persons, temporary foreign workers, refugees, permanent residents. We need to get this through.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad there's such a broad description of the folks that need it, especially like refugees as well. I just don't know why we wouldn't, welcome those folks with open arms and help them as much as we can.
And it's a public health and safety measure. If you don't look after everybody in a community right now, however you feel, it is a public health and safety issue for everybody, and how we look after everybody in this circle now matters more than ever before. And I think people are seeing that more and more. Certainly, I haven't gotten a lot of pushback about this motion. I think Canadians by and large believe in caring and looking after each other and ensuring that people have what they need, at least minimum human rights and dignity. And we just have to push it forward.
Yeah. My next question goes a little bit off topic, because in one of the discussions I watched that you had done, you mentioned that there's special treatment for capital gains. And I was wondering what you meant by that. And then in your view, how is that special treatment for capital gains adding to the inequity that we see today?
Well, I think, I certainly spoke about that. Like there's billions and billions of dollars that we're losing in offshore tax havens. We invest, I don't think credit card companies need $50 million. I don't think Loblaws needs $12 million for fridges. The government just announced a couple of weeks ago that they're going to spend between $1 and $5 billion on air drones. In the midst of all this kind of frivolous spending, there's people that are starting to flow onto the streets, and that includes families and children who have lost work and employment as a result of the pandemic. And that impacts people. Again, governing is about choices, and I choose people. It's time to divest from corporate welfare and put that money into people.
So, I guess our podcast is obviously focused on all things finance and feminism, and we're finding obviously there's increasing, I guess, intersectionality between the two, more so I think even than I originally thought. But how do you see this motion helping women in particular? And we continue to see obviously the pay gap perpetuating. And we also see that women were affected more so with the pandemic and having to, take on that caregiver role and maybe take a step back from the corporate world.
Well, 100%. I think, a lot of people are calling it a she-covery. I mean, it's, women across this country are the ones that have been some of the hardest hit by the pandemic. I mean, one of the things that our party is fighting for certainly is universal childcare. We know that a financed universal child care supports women in the workforce. So absolutely it impacts women, and certainly women, particularly those that are heading single parent households. This is critical. Poverty costs a lot of money. It hurts families, it hurts mental health, it hurts physical health, and by and large, women have been impacted significantly by COVID-19. So it's absolutely critical, to ensure that we get this guaranteed livable basic income through.
And I wonder if it will, obviously, if everyone that is below a certain income receives this guaranteed livable income, I wonder if that will start to, at a base level, erode some of those kind of disparities between men and women when it comes to earning a wage.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think, we have a long way to go to fight for income inequality. We also need to ensure that everybody has a guaranteed livable basic income. I don't think one is at the exclusion of the other. I think both are problematic. I've been a professional woman for many years, earning much less than my male counterparts. I mean, this is a cultural norm that needs to shift. But also one of the other things that needs to shift is that we have the resources in Canada to ensure that individuals don't live in poverty, whether they be women, members of the LGBTQIA community, children. I mean, we don't have to live in a society where people live in poverty or are spilling on the streets because of losing employment during a pandemic and moving to encampments. We can do better. We are in a critical juncture. Not only is this a public and health and safety concern, as I mentioned, if you want to social distance, if you want to hand wash, you need water and you need a home to live in. So it's critical right now that we support this motion, that we push forward to make sure that it becomes legislation. Again, with the inclusion of paragraph 5 of my motion, we need to keep pushing it forward.
So when you say that we need to keep pushing it forward, you've gotten over 30,000, I think you said 31,000 signatures, which is amazing. Like, what are the next steps besides collecting more signatures?
Well, we'll be having a national day of action. Write your MPs, call your senators, let them know that this is an election issue, and your vote will depend on them supporting this or not. This is a human rights matter. This is a dignity matter. This is a health and safety matter. So I'm petitioning again. 31 signatures, good. I'd like to see 5 billion signatures. I'd like to see wholesome participation in human rights and dignity in this country at leahgazan.ca/basic income motion. We need to get this through.
I have a question, and maybe this is just my own, I guess, being naive around politics sometimes and not knowing everything around it. But if, let's say, I call my senator or my MP or I write them, does that actually have an impact when you are an MP, that when people are calling you?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I get lots of emails in my mailbox, and it certainly tells me what people are focused on. I know that because of the over 31,000 signatures that we've had on the petition, now members across the way are wanting to talk about it. Other parties are getting interested in, people are getting excited. And if people think, if elected officials know that this is going to be an election issue, they're going to pay attention. I think sometimes people forget the importance of people power, because people are the ones that decide whether we have a job or not. And I think we need to come out in full force. People need to come out in full force, tell all levels of government, senators, members of parliament, talk to your local organizations that would support this, and say, why don't you send off a letter of endorsement? We need to keep pushing, and we cannot stop to build the momentum until we realize this basic motion, very basic, that will ensure human rights and dignity for all.
And I think that's something that maybe people forget, or they think that, they're only one person. And so, why would an MP listen to me? Or, what is me emailing really going to do? But
it does something. Let me tell you, I'm elected now. I'll tell you, it does something when somebody writes me an email. And particularly for MPs that actually read them, I do read my emails and I do respond, and my team responds in a really timely way. What people tell us matters to us, because it tells us what people's concerns are. We are able to identify what the priorities areas are. And, you're the boss. You deserve a response, and you deserve to have systems of governments and programs that reflect what you want.
Absolutely. So you heard it here first. You're the boss. email your MPs or call them. Maybe you didn't hear it here first.
And also we'll be organizing a National Day of Action, so stay tuned. If you signed the petition so far, we'll be sending off information about the campaign that we're running in support of a guaranteed livable basic income, and I encourage you to join, and I encourage you to mobilize others to join. Sign the petition. It is working. People are paying attention. Let's keep signing it and getting it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I will definitely get involved, and I appreciate what you're saying with calling and emailing, because I think from what I've heard from fellow Albertans right now, a lot of us have been put on the autoresponder, so it's nice to hear that there's an elected official that still represents their community and doesn't have everybody on autoresponder. So that's really nice.
We won't name names.
We won't name names, but they've heard from me. I have a final question for you, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit from what I wrote. But so right now, your party at the federal level has put out calls for universal childcare, pharmacare, including dental, I believe, a wealth tax, the guaranteed livable basic income. What if you got everything you want, and if all these motions went through? What do you think the world would look like if you got all of these things and woke up the next day and it was implemented as you know, to your specifications? What would the world look like?
Well, I think what we have to remember is that when you invest in people, it's good economics. I certainly can speak to my motion to say that, you know, at a time where we see growing rates of unemployment, when you actually invest money in people, that money flows back into the economy, whether it be, that's what keeps small businesses open. And small businesses, for example, are the biggest employer. And in order to go to work, you need a universal daycare program, childcare program to ensure that people can go to work. You know, and like I said, I think before the podcast started, we're one of the few countries in the world, one of the only ones that has a Medicare program without a universal pharmacare, because we know it costs more if somebody goes to the doctor and then doesn't have the medicine they need. And we've certainly seen that with people who have diabetes, that if they only could afford the medicine that they required, they wouldn't have to have had amputations. And we know the high costs of when the health is left. So what would it look like? We know through research, we know through even Medicare, if you compare the state situations in the States and Canada, that it looks pretty good. And I don't think there's anything scary about ensuring people are looked after, ensuring that everybody has human rights and dignity and has what they need to live joy.
I really like that, the living joy especially. And I don't think you can get there, obviously, if your basic needs aren't met. And
100%.
That's exactly.
I've done a lot of writing about that, actually. I've prior to this, I was an academic, and I did a lot of writing about that. Yeah.
Fantastic.
The right to joy.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I feel like this is a really productive conversation around what Motion 46 is and a universal basic income. Where can people find you online?
They can go on Twitter at Leah Gazan, at LeahGazan, and they can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Leah Gazan MP. So LeahGazan MP.
Amazing. And can you share one more time where people can go and sign the petition and get more information around the Day of Action?
Oh, yes, sign. So Leah Gazan, LeahGazan.ca/basic income motion. And thank you to both of you for fighting also to make the world a better place. It's up to us, and we are going to win it.
I sure hope so.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Gone, thought I lost my mind. Creature without a spine. Took back what should be mine.
episode. Let us know what you think on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Pink Tax Podcast is recorded in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.
Our music is provided by Margot. You can find her work at noisebymargot.com. Sound editing by Peter Dobson. If you'd like to support the Pink Tax Podcast, you can make a donation at liberapay.com/pinktaxpodcast and submit a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.